Mysterious Ancient Mariners. Part 7. Backed into a corner with no choice but to fight. The Greeks were driven by a burning patriotism. Their homes, their gods, the very spirit of their lives, democratic freedom in its precious infancy, were threatened by the dead hand of Persian despotism. A world of divine autocracy in which a man was no more than a slave to his king or his god. So the Athenians put their trust at last in the wooden walls of their galleys, and by late July the whole working male population of the little city-state, slave and free, had taken to the sea. By now the Persian army had turned the head of the Aegean and was marching south unopposed. In its path the states of northeastern Greece submitted without a blow, and soon Xerxes' vanguard was moving under the shadow of Mount Olympus, barely 160 miles from Athens. The Greeks had once thought of facing the Persians in this region, but no good narrow pass existed for their stand, and the coast offered the Greek fleet only open waters and a dangerously craggy and harborless shore. Eventually, the Greek army, an assemblage of land forces from the many city-states, decided to make a stand where the mountains fall steeply into the sea, at the rocky point of Thermopylae, 85 miles from Athens, while the Greek fleet, mainly Athenian, planned to meet the Persian ships in the water of Artemisium to the northeast. Behind the defending fleet, the 110-mile-long island of Euboea, hugging the coast, offered a safe channel for withdrawal with friendly shores on either side. But the Greek fleet that sailed north was pitifully small. A reserve flotilla of almost 200 ships had to be left behind to guard the shores to the south. So now, against more than 1,200 Persian galleys, the Greeks advanced with only 271 ships. Of these, 147 were Athenian, including 100 of Themistocles' new triremes. Most of the rest were sent by Athenians' allies in the Peloponnesus. Within 2 days they reached Artemisium and the head of the island of Euboea, and hauled their galleys up on its long, shallow beach. Here they waited for the Persians. They set up beacons on the hills and on the islands of Skiathos to the north, where several galleys kept watch. Some 40 miles to their west, on the mainland, a 7,000-man force of the army had reached the pass of Thermopylae. This little vanguard, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, but predominantly composed of soldiers from the Peloponnesus, probably hoped to hold the pass until a larger army could march north at the end of the month. Meanwhile, they dug in and built a heavy wall. They, too, could only wait. A trusted Athenian officer named Habernicus, captaining a fast 30-oared galley, was the sole liaison between the fleet and the army. At dawn on August the 3rd, 13 fast Phoenician galleys, harbingers of the Persian fleet, swept down the Greeks' advance patrols at Skiathos. A reconnaissance unit of 3 Greek triremes fled before them, but one by one they were overtaken. The Phoenicians meted out an odd treatment to their captives. From the first captured vessel, they took the most handsome Greek soldier and cut his throat as a ritual sacrifice. On the second, a Greek marine named Pythias, who fought with furious valor before falling, was nursed back to health with the aid of the Phoenician ship's medicine chest, something unknown to the Greeks, and exhibited with admiration to the rest of the fleet. The third vessel ran aground, and its crew escaped into the hinterland. Unhampered now, the Phoenicians prepared the way for the main Persian force. They set up a stone marker to warn their cohorts away from the reef between Skiathos and the mainland, scouted the generous harbor of nearby Aphetei for a naval base, and surveyed the Greek fleet as it lay opposite on the sandy fringes of the Euboea. By August the 12th, the armada of the great king was sprawling across the coast close to the north. By night, its foremost ships were hauled onto the beaches. The rest of the fleet riding 8 deep at anchor offshore. To the Greeks, staring north, the whole country seemed to be covered by the sparks of the enemy's fire, and the sea dotted with their riding lights. The oracle at Delphi was visited again and told the panicking inquirers, "Pray to the winds." On the morning of August 13th, Greek prayers were answered. A savage storm erupted out of the calm. Referring to the god of the north wind, Herodotus wrote, "Boreas fell with violence on the barbarians at their anchorage." The Greeks retreated deeper into their channel and waited while for 3 days the storm lashed the exposed Persian fleet, driving scores of triremes onto the rocks, where they were smashed or sunk. The Persian crews, floundering ashore, barricaded themselves from the local inhabitants behind the debris of their ships. all around them, the beaches became littered with a horrific richness of Persian treasure amid bloated corpses. Some 400 triremes vanished as if they had never existed. Not until the morning of August 16 did the gale let up. Perhaps because Xerxes' priests, wrote Herodotus, lulled the wind with spells, or perhaps, he added with a dash of Greek skepticism, it ceased of itself. The crippled fleet straggled back into its base at Aphytae for repairs. Yet it still outnumbered the Greeks by about 3-1, and many Greek commanders talked of abandoning Artemisium and retreating south. The first night after the storm, 200 Persian galleys and supply vessels set off south around the eastern coast of Euboea, intending to circle the island and block the Greeks' escape from the rear. On a given signal, the main Persian fleet at Aphytae would push forward in a massed frontal attack, and the two fleets would crush their enemy between them. This ambitious plan might have spelled out the end for the Greeks had it not been betrayed to Themistocles by a deserter, a diver named Schyllias, who crossed the strait to Artemisium from Aphytae to warn the Greeks. Herodotus says that Schyllias claimed to have swum underwater for 10 miles without surfacing. The fact is, says the historian, that he probably swam normally to Artemisium or even rowed. This report of Persian plans and numbers sent such fear through the Greek chiefs that Themistocles had to bribe and browbeat them into obedience. After all events, the Greeks decided to attack before they were sandwiched. Herodotus wrote, "When the Persian commanders and crews saw the Greeks thus sailing toward them with their few ships, they thought them possessed with madness and went out to meet them, confident of easy victory." But the Greeks had advanced suddenly, late in the afternoon, and the Persian squadrons, still refurbishing, were strung out all along the coast. So unexpected was the attack that most of the first line of Persian war galleys fell to the Greeks. But the Persians soon came swarming out of their many anchorages and began to surround the attackers. With every passing minute as ship after ship arrived, the Greek advantage faded. Finally, the Greeks fell back into a defensive formation. Side by side, their heavy ships presented to the Persians a huge defensive arc. Herodotus recorded that the arc became a hedgehog formation, called the Kyklos, or circle. The beleaguered ships lay with sterns inward and bows outward, a gigantic circle of bronze rams and armed men. Against this formation, in the dimming light, the Persians could make no headway. Despite superior numbers, they could not break through the arc. The Greeks were heavily armed, their bronze helmets plumed with horsehair and their cheeks ringed with protective plates, lending their faces an almost mineral inhumanity. Bronze cuirasses protected their chests and backs. Their legs were sheathed with bronze greaves. Holding 3-foot round or violin-shaped shields and wielding spears and iron-bladed swords, they were masters of impregnable defense. At dusk, the Persians broke off, and each fleet retired to its base. That night another storm broke. Corpses and wreckage, Greek and Persian alike, drifted up to Aphytae, bumping against the anchored ships in the night, fouling the oars of those on guard and unnerving the sailors, while thunder crashed over Mount Pelion to the north. At the same time, the 200-vessel Persian fleet that was rounding the southern tip of Euboea took the full force of the storm. Some of the ships were dashed on the rocks, others fled before the wind and were scattered. By August 19th, both by land and sea, the campaign had reached its crux. Just as the Greek fleet had been holding the Persians at bay in the channel of Artemisium, so the Greek army had been blocking Xerxes' army in the pass of Thermopylae. But now, after 2 days of heroic defense, the Greek flank had been turned by a traitor who had led the Persians over a path through the hills to the south. The bulk of the Greek army retreated while it could save itself, leaving Leonidas with 2,000 men to hold the pass and delay the Persian advance as long as possible. On the morning of August 20th, the Persians attacked overwhelmingly by land and sea. At Thermopylae, Leonidas and his battalion fought with a valor that has enshrined them ever since in a glow of heroism. At the last moment before the Persians finally overcame them, Habronicus' galley slipped anchor and sailed for Artemisium toward the fleet. By midday, the battle at Thermopylae was over. The way to Athens lay open. In the bright August sunlight, the Persians came in a massive concave crescent, the flanks straining forward to envelop the Greek line. But the Greek ships, their force bolstered by 53 new galleys from Attica, stretched from one shore of the Gulf of Euboea to the other and could not be surrounded. They confronted the Persians calmly, head-on. The two lines crashed together, the bronze-headed rams tore at opposing bows, but after the first splintering impact, the battle stagnated into a turmoil of interlocked decks, with marines pressing from ship to ship as if on land, slashing and thrusting their way through crowds of unarmed oarsmen. The Egyptian soldiers proved especially dangerous. Wielding boarding spears and poleaxes, they took a terrible toll on the Greeks. By nightfall, half of the Athenian vessels and many of the Persian galleys were disabled. They had fought each other to a standstill. At dusk, the Persians retired to Ephyte, while the Greeks, wandering over the straits, picked up their downed comrades and tried to salvage half-sunk ships. On the beach of Artemisium, the flames of the burning wreckage and funeral pyres filled the night with a bitter brightness. And now, Habereicus's galley arrived with the news of the massacre at Thermopylae. The fleet could afford to wait no longer. Leaving their fires burning on the shore to persuade the Persians that they still held their position, the Greeks sailed down the long Gulf of Euboea, under the cover of darkness, back to their threatened homeland. But the battles at Artemisium had not been in vain. The Greeks had faced up to Xerxes' navy. They were taught by actual achievements in the face of danger, wrote the Greek historian Plutarch, that neither multitudes of ships, nor brilliantly decorated figureheads, nor boastful shouts, nor barbarous battle hymns have any terror for men who know how to come to close quarters and dare to fight there. And the gods seemed to be on their side. By storm as well as combat, the Persians had suffered cruelly. At Artemisium, wrote the poet Pindar, the brave sons of Athens planted the shining cornerstone of their freedom. Only the cornerstone, however, and not yet the structure of freedom. Indeed, to Xerxes it now seemed that Greece lay at his feet. Marching south and inland from Thermopylae, his army sacked those cities that had not surrendered, while the battle fleet sailed down the Gulf of Euboea, ravaging the coasts. The terror of Xerxes' name and the news of Thermopylae preceded him. South of Athens, the Peloponnesian Greeks, with an army of 30,000, were building a wall across the isthmus of their great peninsula, abandoning Athens to its fate. Themistocles, limping back home with his fleet, found Athens in turmoil. In 2 days, the Persians would reach the suburbs. Many Athenians were fleeing in panic, yet thousands more were unwilling to leave their city. Indeed, wrote Plutarch, most of them were distressed at the thought, saying that they neither wanted victory nor understood what safety could mean if they abandoned to the enemy the shrines of their gods and the sepulchres of their fathers. For 2 days, the sea was covered with ships as the populace was ferried to the nearby city-states, one of which, Salamis, an island 4 miles west of the city where the fleet headquarters lay. Hundreds of deserted dogs gathered on the shores and howled after their departing boats. On the Acropolis, towering above, a skeleton garrison, along with the priestesses who tended the shrines, stood behind the wooden barricades protecting the sacred heights. They were determined to make a suicide stand. On August 27th, as the Persian vanguard clattered into the city's empty streets, the last Greek ship was crossing the sea to Salamis. Now, everything depended on the fleet, but its leaders, meeting in council, were still divided. Some, notably the Peloponnesians, wanted to fall back on the isthmus. Others, including Themistocles and the Athenians, urged that the Persian fleet might be met at Salamis. While they continued to debate, Greek sailors, staring over the sea, watched a pall of smoke rising from the Acropolis. Soon afterward, they learned that the Persians had destroyed its wooden ramparts with flaming arrows, and that when their forces had scaled its heights, the defenders either had committed suicide by hurling themselves from the cliffs, or had been butchered, soldiers and priestesses alike. In the fleet, some captains were so alarmed that they proposed immediate flight westward, but Themistocles continued to argue that the fleet should hold its station. Salamis, he pointed out, was both tactically and strategically more favorable to the Greeks than the isthmus. Like the island of Euboea, it hugged the Greek mainland and provided only narrow entrances into the long channel between. Such a confined front favored the fewer but heavier Greek ships. If they deflated the enemy here, a Persian attack on the Peloponnesus would not be feasible. The Corinthian admiral, Diamantus, told Themistocles to hold his tongue, that he was now a man without a country. Themistocles furiously retorted that Athens had 200 warships, which was country enough. The argument continued for 3 weeks, while Xerxes assembled his naval might on the captured beaches of Phaleron, and the Greeks waited uneasily in the anchorages of Salamis. For the time being, it was a stalemate. The Persians were reluctant to attack in close waters, but they could not advance on the Peloponnesus while the Greek fleet remained intact. The Greek losses at Artemisium had partly been made good by a reserve flotilla of 99 ships, 57 of them Athenian, and the battle fleet now numbered 310 war galleys. The Persians had brought up their own reserves to replace their losses at Artemisium. They had now some 1,000 ships, and again outnumbered the Greeks by more than 3 to 1. But they were so wary of engaging those powerful galleys and bronze-sheathed men that Xerxes first attempted to build a causeway between the mainland and Salamis, a distance of 3/4 of a mile across the sea that was in places more than 3 fathoms deep. But the Greeks brought up a regiment of archers who harassed the construction teams with such deadly effect that the project was abandoned. By about September 16th, Xerxes' patience was giving out. He came down to Phaleron, wrote Herodotus, and called out a naval conference to debate whether a sea fight should be risked or no. His commanders, seated below him in order of state, urged him to attack, all but Artemisia, queen of Halicarnassus, who counseled him to march on the Peloponnesus so that the Peloponnesian contingents in the Greek fleet would be drawn away to defend their homeland, and Greek unity would once again be shattered. But the majority won the day. By the evening, the Persian fleet had sailed for Salamis and had taken up its battle stations. Xerxes, however, also took Queen Artemisia's advice to the extent of sending some 30,000 men, carrying torches and singing battle songs along the road of the isthmus, hoping to lure the Peloponnesian flotillas into the open sea. Even the awesome spectacle of the advancing Persian fleet did not resolve the dispute among the Greek commanders, who still debated where to make their stand. One of the group, wrote Herodotus, argued that it was best to sail to the Peloponnesus and risk battle for that instead of abiding at Salamis and fighting for a land already taken by the enemy. In the end, Themistocles forced matters to a head. This blunt and ostentatious man was yet a subtle manipulator of men's minds. He secretly dispatched his trusted slave, Sicinus, in a small boat across the sea to Xerxes. Sicinus probably left in the darkness before dawn on September 19th. And reached the Persians at first light. He told them that he had come from Themistocles, who had changed sides and was ready to join with the Persians. The Greeks, he said, were planning to escape, and if Xerxes attacked now, he would annihilate his enemies before they were able to evade him. Some scholars doubt this story, but whether or not Xerxes did receive such a message, he sent his fleet into action on the night of September 19th. His first moves were preparatory. Some 400 soldiers were silently landed on the islet of Psytalea, south of the Salamis Channel. Meanwhile, the powerful Egyptian squadrons secretly circled Salamis and blocked the channel's western exit. The straits to either side were covered by other units of the Persian fleet. The Greeks were now trapped and forcibly united. Themistocles had won his way.